Hey everyone, and welcome to the McCollum Show, a podcast by Human Reaction where I interview leading voices on hot button issues to arm you with the truth and advance liberty. Today, I am interviewing January 6th attorney and Montana Libertarian activist Roger Roots. We are talking about the DOJ report that came out recently that informed us that 26 informants were present on January 6th. He claims that there were actually a lot more than that and that there were actual agents present as well. We dive into his cases and we talk about the potential Trump pardon. I hope you enjoy it. Here's Roger.
Liam McCollum, really one of the brightest young minds in the liberty movement, one of our rising stars.
So you've been awfully busy in D.C. Normally, you're a Montana Libertarian and you're coming to all of our conventions and meetings and stuff, but you've been very busy as of recent. And I wanted to bring you on to talk about the new report from the DOJ that revealed 26 informants were there present on January 6th. But before we get into that, why don't you introduce yourself and just explain how you got involved in the J6 trials and maybe for context, just like some of the big cases that you've been involved with.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been probably mostly a full-time January 6th defense lawyer for the last 2 years. And I sort of got jerked into it in some ways. I was working on, the Bundy cases prior to that. And I received some calls probably 2.5 years ago from lawyers that wanted me to explain some of the Bundy civil litigation, and I explained it to them, and one thing led to another. I ended up joining the John Pierce law firm, and it turned out that John Pierce law firm was doing several January 6th defense cases, and so it didn't take long before I jumped into a couple of those, and then the big Proud Boy trial was beginning. It was the big trial, the biggest trial of all January 6 cases. The Proud Boy trial was starting up in around December 2022. And there was an attorney named Stephen Metcalf who was representing one of the defendants there, Dominic Pizzola. And let's put it this way. He was over his head. He needed help, needed a little bit more hands-on. So I decided to jump in there, and I flew out to D.C., and it was expected to be about a 6-week trial. It ended up being a 4.5-month-long trial. And from there, I've gotten into a lot of other, I guess, less prominent January 6 trials. But I was telling you off camera, I've actually done 14 January 6 trials at this point. And I believe that's something like 8% of all January 6 trials. So I have a pretty good insight into, the contours of these cases. And, when that OIG report came out last week, FBI Office of Inspector General report, he's saying there were 26 undercover informants there on January 6th. My ears perked up because I thought to myself, wow, I myself have something to add. I myself have cross-examined at least one of those. And I've got some insight into, I think the true scope and scale of this issue. And it's a lot bigger than just 26 undercovers.
Yeah, so here we have Thomas Massie, one of the best congressmen we have, talking about this report where it was revealed that 26 informants were on the ground. And he says that actually some of them were paid. So why don't we get into this report? Have you read the report, and what are the details that you took away from it?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. It'll put you right to sleep. And I think it is designed to be boring and to appear to be very opaque. But in fact, it's not. It appears to have depth. It's got lots of footnotes. And if you start reading it and you think, oh, this is a major detailed report. But it's heavy on, I guess, discussion of nothing. Maybe five or 10 pages of substance about informants. A lot of it is Horowitz. I forget the guy's first name. assistant FBI, one of the assistant FBI directors, the inspector general. It seems like half of the report is nothing but discussions about how they gathered their information for the report. Emails and stuff like that. I mean, it's almost like it's designed to almost evade the questions and maybe mislead readers and bore them and put them to sleep.
It really does appear that way. And also in the coverage of it, there have been similar tactics. So I wanted to play this clip for you where CNN is reacting to the report. And I just want you to react to their narrative and what they take away from it.
We have breaking news into CNN. A new DOJ watchdog report has just been released on the January 6th riot at the Capitol, and this finds that there were no undercover FBI employees at the Capitol during the riot.
This finding runs directly counter to speculation from allies of President-elect Donald Trump, who for years have suggested the violence that day was provoked by federal agents. CNN's Evan Perez joins us now, along with CNN senior law enforcement analyst and former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. Evan, first to you, what does this report outline specifically?
Well, the most important finding that is one that you just outlined, which is that this claim that you've had from Republicans in Congress, allies of Donald Trump, who have claimed that the FBI had agents essentially undercover who helped instigate the riot, that there's video that seems to suggest, in their view, that either people who were being paid by the FBI were essentially helping to stage the insurrection that happened on January 6th.
Yeah, so that kind of gets the point. They're flat out denying that there were any agents involved. But I think maybe here is a good point to make the distinction that I don't think that the narrative has been this entire time that paid agents were on the ground. I think for years people have been suggesting that they were assets, that perhaps they were informants, they were dressed in MAGA hats. Do you think that that's probably what they're doing here? They're trying to say, oh, well, the report came out and said that there were no actual official FBI agents, therefore this narrative has been false. But the report also seems to uncover that there were actual informants on the ground, which I think has been the argument since the beginning.
Yeah, listen, there are so many dimensions of falsity to what was just said there. Number one, the report itself contains a lot of false suggestions, and I would even say false assertions. And I'll go into that later. But then the CNN commentators take it even one step further and suggest that, oh, this report proves that there was no, instigation by these undercovers. For the final report, they call it the watchdog, the OIG, a watchdog. And it is, it's suggestive that, it's all been debunked. It's been disproven. And there were just 26 and none of them really played any role. And I can tell you, as a defense lawyer who has actively cross-examined agents on the witness stand, I can tell you that so much of that is just false. And what is not blatantly false is false by innuendo and suggestion. First of all, a lot of people don't know this, but it isn't just the FBI that had informants. At January 6th, there were so many different agencies. There was FBI. There was Metro PD. We know they had at least 28 undercovers in plain clothes among the crowd. That's Metropolitan Police Department of Washington, D.C. Then there's the Capitol PD. That's the police department that has jurisdiction on the Capitol grounds, thousands of those. They had undercovers, and we know this from documents that we have had in our possession in discovery. We've never really gotten to the bottom of the total numbers. Then there's actually an agency that a lot of Americans don't know about, and it's called Homeland Security Investigations, HSI. That agency, and you can Google it and look it up, it's a fairly new agency. It's only been around about 10 years, but we have reason to believe that they had more than a dozen undercover federal informants, this IHS or HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. And we know that from a case, the Jeremy Brown case in Florida, where Jeremy Brown, a veteran militia guy, I think he might have been a member of Oath Keepers of some level. He gets a knock on his door from these agents, HSI agents, who basically are intimidating him, threatening him, wanting him to become an informant for their agency, which is not the FBI, it's HSI. And they were squeezing him and really basically putting the squeeze on him. So, and I believe in that conversation, which happened to be recorded because he had a Ring camera that was recording the whole conversation. One of those federal officials told him that he better make up his mind because they had 19 more stops to make that day. So that agency, we know from that conversation, at least the government was saying that they were going to be squeezing many others to turn them into informants. That was in December of 2020. That was before January 6th. So that's an agency that probably we can only infer if they said that they had 19 more stops to make to try to recruit informants. So that's an agency that might have had more than a dozen. Then you have Secret Service. Then you have National Park Police. And of course, the Capitol is connected to the mall in D.C., which is under the jurisdiction of the National Park Police. There were so many different agencies that had undercovers that day. And so much of this is lost in the mist. We've never been allowed to examine or cross-examine. Prior to every trial, a lot of people don't realize this. It is just false by the CNN commentators and by the government if they suggest that undercover informants played no role in instigating or played no role in the outcome. I can tell you, as a matter of fact, I'll give you some examples that they did play a significant role, and I know of it, and and it's on the transcripts. I mean, we've cross-examined some of these people. So what was just said there is just blatantly false.
To what extent can you share with us, like, how they did instigate? So you say in discovery, you have transcripts where there's proof that the informants were involved. Can you give any examples?
I will give one specific example during the Proud Boy trial. Okay, so the government rested their case, and the defense, there was 5 or 6 defendants. The defense took over and was presenting their case. One of the defendants, Ethan Nordine, his lawyer put on an actual undercover FBI informant. I believe he might even be acknowledged as one of the so-called 26 that is referenced in that OIG report. I'm not sure. His name was Knowles, Knowles, but I believe he took the witness stand under an alias, which was Aaron. He was just called Aaron. So Aaron is on the stand, and he's an FBI undercover informant. I was in a little bit of a fight with the lawyer, Nick Smith, who's a good friend, good guy, but we were fighting because Nick Smith wanted to put Aaron on the stand. He said Aaron was very nervous and it would all be, it was difficult to get him on the stand. He was very nervous about testifying, did not want the other defense lawyers to ask questions. And I got in a fight with him. I said, no, I'm going to ask some questions. So here's what the significance of this is, it's just one little thing, but it gives you it shows you how much FBI informants did affect the outcome. So I cross-examined just a few questions of this guy, Aaron, who was undercover FBI, and he was in the Proud Boy chapter from Kansas City, I believe. So he had come out there with a group of Proud Boys, and he was in real time. He was texting his FBI handlers, telling them all about what he knew, what he was seeing. And as he crossed into the Capitol grounds, at the moment that he walked into Capitol grounds, he was live texting to his FBI handler saying, hey, this is a surprise to me. Nobody really knows what's going on. There is no plan. This is totally spontaneous. So that's Brady material. It's proof that there was, at least from his perspective, and he was fairly high level in the Kansas City Proud Boy chapter, proof that there was no plan, there was no conspiracy, it was rather spontaneous. Things were just sort of developing. And, that's just one example. Anyways, it turned out, I have to give a little bit more background now, because my client, Dominic Pizzola, was with the group of Proud Boys, along with Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys, Joe Biggs, Nordine, and several others, and probably a group of maybe 50 of them that had been just sort of walking around the Capitol area for about an hour, marching. So the government calls it a march, but it was really, they were just sort of walking around, and they were yelling, F Antifa. They all anticipated that day that they'd be involved in maybe violence with Antifa or Black Lives Matter rioters. And they believed that because it had happened to them previously when they had gone to Washington, D.C. Anyway, let me a little bit more background, because Tarrio and the Proud Boy leadership had given instructions out prior to January 6th saying, hey, let's not be very aggressive and provocative. So let's downplay our Proud Boy status. Let's not wear Proud Boy colors, which is black and yellow or gold, so that we don't provoke Antifa. We don't identify ourselves to Antifa, etc. And so an instruction had gone out. They didn't want to wear body armor and look all scary like they had at some other rallies that they'd been to in the past. However, there was this one gentleman, this young guy, probably in his early 20s. His name was Robert Gieswein. And Gieswein wanted to march with the Proud Boys. And, of course, that would defy the order. He was all dressed in militia outfit. So helmet, tactical gear, body armor, and he had like a club in his hand. It's sort of a scary looking kid, God bless the guy. But, I think now he's doing 4 years in federal prison. But anyway, Mr. Gieswein wanted to get into the walk with the Proud Boys. And guess who who invited him in? It was that undercover FBI informant named Knowles, who took the stand as Aaron. And so I wanted to point out, and it was some of the most damaging pictures of my client, Dominic Pezzola, were pictures of Pezzola inside the Capitol in a sort of a tense confrontation with law enforcement inside the building. And Pezzola was standing next to the young guy, Mr. Gieswein. Again, just a young guy, militia kid who wanted probably to be, who wanted to get involved in this stuff. So Mr. Gieswein wearing camouflage, helmet. He's the scariest guy in the picture. All right. And it was used to damage my client. So I cross-examined Aaron, FBI informant, and I said, isn't it true that that you, an undercover paid FBI informant, are the person that got Mr. Gieswein into the march, looking as scary as possible, wearing all this militia gear, into the march, and I blew up a picture and I had him look at a picture. Who's the scariest guy in the picture? Obviously, it was Mr. Gieswein. And there were objections to my questions, but I think I made the point to the jury that, in fact, it's a lot less scary of a picture if you didn't have Gieswein in it. And the only reason Gieswein was in the picture is because an undercover FBI informant got him there. All right. So that's just a minor little thing. It cannot be said that undercover FBI informants had no role in the outcome of the events, because that was just a little thing, but it's very clear that they did in fact affect the outcome of the events.
And the DOJ report does say that a number of these informants actually entered restricted areas and were present in the Capitol as well. I want to contrast what you just said with another CNN clip just to kind of show what the coverage is. And then I'm going to play a clip from 2 years ago where a congressman actually pushed the FBI director on the question of informants.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the horribly and unfairly treated January 6th hostages.
You see the spirit from the hostages, and that's what they are, as hostages.
President-elect Donald Trump making clear that pardoning January 6th convicts is a top priority for his new administration. He told Time magazine in an interview released Thursday, quote, "I'll be looking at J6 early on, maybe the first 9 minutes. I'm going to do case by case. And if they were nonviolent, I think they've been greatly punished." Trump and his allies have been making false claims for years about the Capitol riot, arguing that law enforcement officials purposefully bungled their intelligence, even using paid informants to rile up an otherwise peaceful rally to create a violent insurrection.
FBI operatives were organizing the attack on the Capitol on January 6th.
3 police officers were caught instigating the crowd, chanting and urging them to go into the Capitol.
An FBI informant who is reported to have, quote, under oath, marched to the U.S. Capitol.
There was Antifa, and there was FBI, there were a lot of other people there, too, leading the charge.
So a brand new report from an independent Justice Department watchdog concludes this, quote, "We found no evidence in the materials we reviewed or the testimony we received showing or suggesting that the FBI had undercover employees in the various protest crowds or at the Capitol on January 6th.
So then she brings on McCabe to talk about the report. And of course, he says similar things, that there were not paid employees there on the ground. But I do, again, want to emphasize there is a distinction between paid FBI employees and informants. And I think since January 6th happened, I think the narrative has been that there were informants or assets on the ground that instigated or provoked the protests. So I'm going to play this clip to prove that. This is Representative Clay Higgins, who was pressuring Clay or Chris Wray at the time, asking if there would be informants or if there were informants on the ground on January 6th.
Director Wray, does the FBI have confidential human sources? Did the FBI have confidential human sources embedded within the January 6th protesters on January 6th of 2021?
Well, Congressman, as I'm sure you can appreciate, I have to be very careful about what I can say about when.
Even now, because that's what you told us 2 years ago.
May I finish? About when we do and do not, and where we have and have not used confidential human sources. But to the extent that there's a suggestion, for example, that the FBI's confidential human sources or FBI employees in some way instigated or orchestrated January 6th, that's categorically false.
Did you have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol on January the 6th prior to the doors being open?
Again, I had to be very careful.
It should be a no. Can you not tell the American people no? We did not have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters positioned inside the Capitol.
Gentleman's time has expired.
You should not read anything into my decision not to share information.
Director Wray,
confidential human
gentleman's
sources.
time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So there you see, I mean, he's denying that there are any employees present or that he has any knowledge. But I think what we're seeing is CNN and similar organizations are taking this DOJ report and they're concluding that there were no agents, there were no official employees. But as you see in 2022, so this was posted on November 15th, 2022, Clay Higgins is asking Chris Wray if there were confidential human sources present on January 6th. And the report does conclude that there were 26. Clay Higgins goes on to suggest that there were potentially over 200 informants on the ground. With all of your cases and everything you've learned in discovery, do you think that there were more than 26 present?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Far more than 26. And by the way, I have, I wouldn't say conclusive proof, but I've talked to enough people to believe that there were actual employees. In other words, actual, not just CHSs or informants, confidential human sources or informants, but that there were actually FBI special agents among the crowds on January 6th. I believe that it is an absolute lie, what was just said there. And I know this because of a case. Let me think. There was a defendant. This was a bigger guy, a former college football star who had some hearing difficulties, hearing problems. Anyway, it's sort of a long story, but he had been at one point, he had lived in the Virginia area, maybe Maryland, and he had actually applied to be in the FBI. So this guy knew FBI agents in the area, and he recognized some of them on January 6th. I could get you his name. But anyway, so I have reason to believe that there were actual paid FBI, quote, employees, all right, not just informants. And by the way, just as a matter of common sense, anyone who knows D.C. knows that the FBI building is about a block and a half away, maybe 4 blocks from the Capitol. All right. And if you look at the number of FBI employees who work in that office, it's in the thousands. There are thousands of FBI agents full-time who live in that general and work in that facility, in that vicinity. So you have to ask the question, where were they on January 6, 2021? I mean, it defies logic that none of them ever thought it would be interesting to walk over and see what was going on. It's obvious they had many FBI FBI employees, and then you go to the informant question, which opens the door to, as Representative Higgins said, hundreds. And again, they're not just one agency, but many different agencies. And a lot of people don't know this, and it's being obscured by the authorities and the establishment right now. But prior to every trial, do you know that the government files motions seeking to preclude the defense, that's us, from asking any questions, from asserting entrapment defense, from asserting the First Amendment as a defense, from asserting misconduct by law enforcement. So prior to every single trial, and I've been in these trials where literally we are prohibited from asking these very questions that we're talking about right now. We're never allowed to ask the questions. Occasionally, I will be cross-examining a cop on the stand, and I'll say, well, what about informants? Objection. The prosecutors will object, and the judge will sustain the objection. And we never get the answers. And you look at these major components of the story, such as the pipe bomb stuff. We are never allowed to even get close to asking those questions and getting any information. It's not provided to us in discovery. In fact, we are basically from the beginnings of these cases, we are told some things are off limits. We are not to ask questions. And then I'll just point out, having reviewed so much body cam footage, so much footage of the story, the initial so-called breaches, not just of the Capitol building, but breaches of the fencing areas. There were several. There was called breach number 1, breach number 2, breach number 3, where a series of fences and gates and things were evaded or knocked over or gotten through by members of the crowd. And what's important is that many of the major players in those breaches are unidentified to this day. And it's astounding because they've arrested and prosecuted something like 1,600 January 6 defendants. And yet some of the major players, the people who were seen on megaphones saying, go forward, go, 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 the people who climbed scaffolding with megaphones telling the crowd to push forward, the people who were rolling up fences saying, go, 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 unidentified, unprosecuted. The guy who broke the first window on the east side of the Capitol is absolutely an Antifa identified activist, not a MAGA activist. His name was Hunter Empke. He ultimately got out with, I think, either a 4-month jail sentence. I mean, the guy who broke the first window on the east side. And there's a great, a very friendly reporter named Bobby Powell. Bobby Powell was interested in this Hunter Empke guy. He got a very light sentence in the big picture compared to the others. Called up the guy's mother, asked him some questions. Well, was he a big Trump supporter? No. The guy was an anarchist. Not that that's bad. The guy was an Antifa. He was there with, and there's some people who say that Antifa had busloads. There was at least 100 Antifa there, and the media will go, these mainstream news legacy media outlets will just go on as if it's all been debunked. And it's not true. There were over 100 Antifa that were present. The guy who broke the first window in the building, we believe, was Antifa. Then you go to the guy who broke the first window on the west side. Now, remember, I represented Dominic Pezzola, the Proud Boy who is credited for breaking one of the windows on the west side. He had a police shield in his hand and he cleared out the glass. But he's not the guy that broke the first window. The guy that broke the first window is a guy wearing a red baseball cap, a red hoodie, and he broke the first window on the west side prior to Pezzola clearing out the glass. And to this day, and even though his face is totally in full view in some footage that day, he has never been identified. The government says they can't find him, don't know who he is. It just defies logic. Who was that gentleman? Nobody knows. There's so many of the most important players of January 6th who to this day remain unidentified.
And of course, you alluded to Ray Epps, who was calling on people to go into the Capitol. And I'll include a clip of Ray.
Put it out there. I'm probably going to go to jail for it. Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol. Into the Capitol. What? No! Fed.
So have you been able to uncover through discovery? I know there are a bunch of evidentiary rules that protect informants, but have you uncovered any evidence that suggests Ray may have been an informant in these cases?
Let me put it this way. My signature is on a subpoena for Ray Epps in the Proud Boy case. And we actually hired a process server, and we paid a process server by the hour to hang out at Ray Epps's place in northern Arizona. Did everything he could to find Ray Epps to serve him with that subpoena. Ray Epps was dodging the subpoena, and at the same time, this was as the Proud Boy trial was coming to an end. Then Ray Epps appears on 60 Minutes, and this topic comes up. Are you an FBI informant? No. Okay. Again, by the way, I have nothing to suggest he is. I will say that he's protected. He was protected and got a very, very light sentence. He ultimately, in my opinion, was prosecuted with a very mild misdemeanor, disorderly conduct, essentially. He took a plea to disorderly conduct and got out with nothing but a slap on the wrist. So I have nothing to suggest he's an informant, but he was very much protected. And to this day, I don't have an answer about Ray Epps. And remember, he only said he was not an FBI informant. And remember what I said, that doesn't mean much because there were so many other agencies, ATF, HSI, et cetera, that had informants that day. So for someone to just say, I was never an FBI informant, that doesn't mean much. There were so many other agencies.
And I think a lot of people have pointed out that, like, if we're singling out Ray Epps, we're just like finding some random innocent guy and we're treating him unfairly. But I think the point is that when you compare his case with other people who have done far less and their treatment, like people who weren't even present on that day who were arrested and were treated much worse than Ray Epps, it's the comparison, I think, that matters here, where Ray Epps is literally shown calling on people to enter the Capitol, provoking people to go into the Capitol, and he received a very light punishment.
Yeah, we represented the so-called praying grandma, Rebecca Lavrenz. She was given what we believe is the largest fine in U.S. history for a misdemeanor, $103,000 fine. Largest fine in American history for a misdemeanor. She did nothing more than walk into the U.S. Capitol for a short time, and she prayed and didn't touch anything, didn't shout, didn't holler. She got convicted of the same thing Ray Epps did, disorderly conduct. And in my opinion, she's completely innocent, and we are appealing. But nonetheless, she gets a $103,000 fine, and Ray Epps I forget what his ultimate penalty was, but it was almost nothing, maybe a year probation or something.
When we've talked, you had mentioned that a few of your clients are still in jail. Is she one of them?
No. She never got any jail time. I think the judge was very reluctant, given she was a very sympathetic character. But he gave her a $103,000 fine, which is a very stiff sentence. We have several. We have a guy doing 7 years, Christopher Alberts, 7 years in prison. We have another guy doing almost 5 years. We have another guy doing exactly 5 years, John George Todd. The sentences, are absolutely the most harshest sentences in American history for anything relating to political rioting or political demonstrating of any kind. You go to law school and you learn about the injustices, all these miscarriages of justice in America's past. Eugene V. Debs, Eugene V. Debs gave some speeches against World War I, and he ended up being prosecuted and put in federal prison for 10 years for, sedition and these charges. And we learned in law school that those were some of the worst miscarriages of justice in American history, 10 years. Well, there are January 6ers who did less and are doing 20, 18 years, 22 years. I mean, it's outrageous. The sentences in January 6 are the most cruel, the harshest sentences in all of American history for participating in political demonstrations of any kind.
Now, you alluded to this very briefly, but I want to make sure that people catch this. You said that you have been unable to make certain defenses. You mentioned the First Amendment defense and then also the entrapment defense. Can you explain that? Are there evidentiary rules that are prohibiting you from doing that, or why are you unable to make these defenses?
Yeah, so right before every trial, the government files these motions in limine to preclude the defense from raising certain defenses. So we're not allowed to even mention the First Amendment. A couple judges have allowed us to some leeway. It depends on the judge, but most of the judges just grant the government's motions, and we're not allowed to say that that the defendant was there to have his voice heard, or remember, there's a huge difference between being in a demonstration seeking to influence a policymaker, seeking to persuade a policymaker to do something or not to do something, which frankly everybody there was doing. They were engaging in First Amendment, traditionally protected speech and expression. They were trying to get the policymakers in the building to either make one decision or make another decision. It's persuasion, it's political speech, it's advocacy. And yet these cases have been presented as attacks. And you actually see the government uses the word attack in all of the indictments, all of the charging instruments, that they accuse the defendant of being in an attack. And these judges just grant this and say, oh, there's no First Amendment defense whatsoever. No, it was an attack. They were there to harm Congress, to harm the building, to shut down proceedings. It's absolutely ridiculous. So in so many of these trials, you're not allowed to argue the First Amendment. You're not allowed to bring up misconduct by the police. And that in itself is outrageous, because I can tell you, having represented Dominic Pezzola in the Proud Boy trial, the group had breached the first, they'd gone past the first fencing, and hundreds of people, and they were sort of yelling. It was quite a zealous, raucous crowd. But then the police start opening fire, hitting people in the faces with rubber bullets, which is a violation of all protocol, by the way. It's actually considered lethal violence or lethal force. Police are not to hit people in the head with rubber bullets. If you hit someone in the eye socket with that, they're dead. You hit them in the temple, they are dead. So Pezzola is standing next to people who are being hit in the face with rubber bullets illegally. And at that point, his sort of Marine anger kicks in, and the crowd got angry. The crowd started to really get a little bit more rambunctious, grabbing some cops, grabbing some shields, etc. And that's sort of what really happened on January 6th. And yet we are not allowed to raise it as a defense in so many of these trials.
And you've talked about how you tried to motion to get them a different venue and things like that, and you have been unable to get a fair trial for these guys. What is how successful have you been in making these arguments? Have all of your cases failed in trial court, and are you trying to appeal them? What are the status of the cases right now?
It's ironic, because I'm one of the winningest January 6th defense lawyers in terms of total counts that I've defeated. We've defeated a count here and there, but the jury conviction rate is 100%. Not a single January 6er has been fully acquitted by a jury at all. It is such a hostile jury pool. So we do have some great appeals. We have an appeal base. So many of the barriers that used to limit law enforcement were just thrown away. I'll give you one example. We are appealing the largest search warrant in world history, which is the search warrant that the Capitol Police and the FBI obtained right after January 6th to these search warrants were served on these tech companies like Google, AT&T, MCI, Verizon, to get every single phone number that was inside the Capitol on January 6th, the largest search warrant in American history. And I argued it is an unconstitutional general warrant. And myself and John Pierce, my law partner, we are appealing that in the case of Lloyd Cruz. And that case is currently before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. So we do have some hope that we'll overturn some of these terrible precedents. it's really been a hostile terrain, and just it's like being on a battlefield. It's like the Bad News Bears taking on the New York Yankees.
Will you be able to bring up the First Amendment defense on appeal in any way?
Actually, we are definitely doing that. We're bringing up the First Amendment. Ironically, in the Rebecca Lavren's case, the praying grandma case, the judge actually instructed, that's my dog barking out there, but the judge falsely instructed the jury that there are no First Amendment rights at the U.S. Capitol. And so we will be definitely appealing that in that case and other cases.
Great. So I want to get you to react to one more video. I wonder if you've seen this video. It's of Tim Pool. I think this happened a couple days ago. He was arguing with influencer Luke Beasley about the January 6th protests. Here's the video.
You have.
No,
right?
I
So
haven't.
No, stop. You don't know anything about these January 6 cases. You don't know why these people are in jail. You don't know that a man is in Brooklyn right now for 3 years without charge or trial. And when Donald Trump says these people have been held for too long, you say, no, Trump is wrong. Keep them locked up. That's fucking fascist. Dude, you've been sitting here with no knowledge of the specifics of some of these cases. There is a man in Brooklyn right now. I'm going to say it again. No charges whatsoever brought. He's been in jail for 3 fucking years. For you to sit there and say it is good that he remains locked up is fascism. That is saying the hierarchical system of the courts and the government is just, and the process is all that matters. And I am saying perhaps 3 years is enough, because I actually have moral logic and an understanding of these cases. Hence, my position on January 6th has always been the people who have attacked police must go to prison. But 3 years is a fucking long time for assault on an officer. We have seen people on the far left, notably when they were firebombing shit all across Minnesota, 33 people murdered. And how many criminal charges did we get for this? When they firebombed a police station and forced the police to evacuate. On May 29th, 2020, when thousands of far leftists firebombed the White House grounds and set fire to St. John's Church and injured 100 police officers, how many fucking people went to prison for 3 years? How many of them who never showed up on that day are in prison for 20 years? Enrique Tarrio wasn't even in D.C. on January 6th. And you are saying that man who his only crime was, quote, don't leave. That's his only crime. You think he should be in prison for 20 years because you're a fascist. You don't care what the facts are. You don't care if this is unjust. You only care that the machine state has decreed you are not to be locked up. And this is the problem I have with the left. They don't know the facts. They don't care about the facts. They view morality as a blanket government stroke of the pen, and every person, regardless of their crime, should be in prison for decades. I reject it outright. The people who fought cops should go to prison. They did. It's been 3 years. But when you've got people who are on misdemeanor charges for having walked into a building at 4 p.m. after the riot, and I know some of these people, they walked into a building for 2 minutes and walked out, and they got 18 months for that. I don't see you defending the innocent people who walked onto a public grass at a public building after a riot had been completed. You don't know. You don't care. You've taken a tribal position and people are suffering because of it. Now you say that Donald Trump saying the injustice that we've seen warrants commutation or pardons. You say that means he's advocating for violence. This is the ultimate problem. Then you cite a press release from Maryland saying, but the right's more violent. There is a distinction between a white supremacist as a right-wing group and a run-of-the-mill Christian conservative who showed up on that day not to protest. Let's talk about Brandon Strzok. He never went in the building. He was on the other side of the building. There was a permitted protest. He walked up the stairs and he was yelling. They put this guy in prison. There is Owen Schroyer, who was at a permitted rally, who was yelling death to communists. They put him in prison and specifically cited his speech. My dude, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's fine. I get it. We try to be polite. We try to be nice. But there are so many young liberals who sit here and say, the corporate press told me that these people are bad and the machine state government has decreed it by pen. So I don't care what crime they committed. I don't care what the jury said. I don't care who was on the jury. Enrique Tarrio, who was not there, should be in prison for 2 decades. Tell me this now. Why is Enrique Tarrio in prison?
Yeah, so they uncovered with him his plot to overthrow the government.
Enrique Tarrio?
Yeah, and his organization.
What plot? Who's they? Give me some prosecutors. Give me some fucking data. Stop squinting at me and saying the prosecutors did a thing. You didn't know. You didn't read it. You didn't read the court papers. All you know is the fascist machine state told you he should be in prison, and you're saying yes to them.
I mean, that really does seem like seem like what it comes down to is just that a lot of people are just touting corporate news talking points.
Yeah. I have to agree with everything that Tim Pool just said right there. I was in that trial with Tarrio. I was there every day for 4.5 months with Tarrio. There was no evidence. There was no evidence of any plot, any plan, any overarching conspiracy to breach the Capitol, storm the Capitol. Everything was pretty much chaos that day. And by the way, the government, with all of its powers, all of its warrants, all of the powers of surveillance, and the government seized every cell phone. They looked at every text message, telegram chats, all of the social media, and they couldn't come up with anything other than memes that were exchanged by Tarrio and other Proud Boys. Some text, just like Tim Pool referenced one of them. Tarrio did say when some of the Proud Boys had breached the Capitol, he said, "Stay there, don't leave." Okay, nothing other than that kind of stuff. In fact, the government even squeezed and turned certain Proud Boy leaders. Jeremy Bertino was one who had at one time been the heir apparent, might have been in line to replace Tarrio as the leader. And the government squeezed him, and he pled guilty to seditious conspiracy. He took the stand for the government and testified against the Proud Boys. But Bertino, when he was asked, was there a plan? He had to admit, no, there never was. And there was no evidence otherwise. So it's just a lie. And back to what Tim Pool said about the left. The left has shown its colors in these cases because, I'm older than you are, Liam. All right. I grew up when the left sort of had a civil liberties component to it. The ACLU and all of those groups were, you could say, ostensibly left-leaning groups and whatnot. And they have absolutely, now that they occupied all three branches of government, essentially, now that they took all positions of authority where they are now in control of all institutions, their real colors are just absolutely on display, where all they want to do is crush and destroy their enemies and create a tyranny. Now you see their position is, hey, tyranny is just fine as long as it's our tyranny. It's just horrendous what has happened to the left.
Right. I mean, the ACLU used to defend Nazis protesting in the streets, and now they're going after people, or the left at least is going after people who are protesting in the Capitol. But I do want to ask you, just from a devil's advocate perspective, and as a libertarian, are there any cases that you've encountered where you say, absolutely, this person committed violence on that day, they should be in jail? Or what's your argument about January 6th in general? And then are there any individual cases where you have identified there has been criminal activity? Well,
listen, there are a lot of it was reactive. I'll just say this, and I've thought about this enough. Ultimately, the criminal justice system is an institution that humans have created to keep humans in line, to keep us all. It's for accountability, and it separates us from other animals, frankly, where instead of other animals probably have other mechanisms to deal with deviance, to keep each other in line. Well, we have these elaborate systems, and ultimately it's about accountability, dealing with deviance. Okay, so the question is, well, what really morally speaking, at some point you have to recognize, and I've often made this point with judges, and no one listens to me thus far, but morally speaking, all of us have seen NCAA basketball championship games or college football games at the end of the game where the crowd rushes the field. We've all seen this, where, let's face it, the first 2 or 3 guys that rush the field probably know they're doing something wrong. They are trespassing. The first 3 guys that jump onto the college football field out of the stadium, out of the crowds in the audience, they're doing something wrong. All right. But what about the next 100 guys? What about the next 300? Are they really morally, should they be prosecuted to the full extent of the law? Are they really trespassing? I argue that they aren't even trespassing at some point, because the authorities, the referees, the authorities of the game, And ultimately, you see this in January 6th. The authorities on the field, the police, ultimately, they retreat to the side and they let the rioters have their little moment. All right. So morally speaking, these guys should not be prosecuted to the full extent of the law if they went into the building. Let's say they were the 453rd person inside. Honestly, they should not be convicted or charged with trespassing. The first couple guys, sure. All right. The first guys who broke down a barrier, absolutely, they committed trespassing. And if you look for violence on January 6th, you can find a few little episodes of violence that was probably aggressive by the crowd, not the police. I argue the police started a lot of it. But in any case, yeah, you can find some instances of criminal misconduct, but it's just like Mr. Tim Pool said there. They've all paid and paid and paid. Every single one of them has been over prosecuted and over punished.
So before I let you go, I just wanted to get your perspective on also just the state of the Libertarian Party a little bit, to kind of pivot. But Donald Trump came to our convention, and a lot of people in the party were upset about it. But he has made an argument that if libertarians vote for him, he will pardon people like Ross Ulbricht. He has also said that he's going to pardon the January 6th protesters. He calls them political prisoners. And I just want your take on that move in general, and if you like the direction of the Libertarian Party has taken, and also if you believe Trump is going to pardon these protesters.
Okay, several things there. Number one, I am an advocate of a full, immediate pardon of every J6er. They should all just be immediately pardoned because they never had a fair opportunity to fairly defend themselves. It was in a hostile jurisdiction. All the rules of evidence, all the rules of procedure were used against them. The judges, who are supposed to be a barrier to some of this, honestly, I'll just say the judges did not fully live up to their true potential as protectors of the Bill of Rights. I'll just say it. They didn't. And so when that happens, when all three branches of government all basically join together to basically persecute a group of people, there has to be a safety valve. I think a presidential pardon actually could lend balance, and it's almost what is needed right now. President Trump could pardon every single one, and maybe that'd be the only way to get some balance out of what has happened. With regard to the Libertarian Party and Trump, it's so interesting. We're living in such an interesting period. There are some things, obviously, that Trump is not libertarian about. If ultimately his 4 years in the administration leaves us with a larger government, I will be so disappointed. Because, I think Trump has it's the moment in history where Trump, I think there are powers that want to fight against big government and overarching, intrusive, expansive government. And in some ways, yeah, the Republican Party, the MAGA movement, has benefited and maybe grabbed onto some of that momentum. And, it's an interesting time to be a Libertarian Party activist. I myself voted, I voted for Chase Oliver myself. But I understand that, Trump absolutely has an opportunity, and he has surrounded himself with very liberty-minded activists, even Elon Musk. Vivek Ramaswamy. These people are libertarian in their core, I would say. So it is a golden opportunity. I certainly am optimistic for the future. So we'll see.
I definitely am too. And if anyone is interested, I highly recommend listening to my interview. I actually did 2 interviews with Angela McCardle, one before the convention where she announced that Donald Trump would be coming to our convention. And then after, just a few weeks ago, to get her take on the election and how optimistic she is about the Trump presidency. And I agree with you. I don't think that Donald Trump is a libertarian entirely, but I do think that we're in this really weird cultural moment where, we have some influence, even if it's a little bit. And if he is able to pardon, or if our influence leads him to pardon people like Ross Ulbricht or the J6ers, that would just be amazing. But thank you so much, Roger, for being here. I really enjoy it. Where can people find your stuff? Where can they follow you, and where can they help support these cases?
I'm in many places. You can find me on Twitter under my name, X. I'm also active in something I started a few years ago called Lysander Spooner University, and I have a website, lysanderspooneruniversity.com. I put out some great libertarian content on that site. I've been trying to turn that into an actual university, a hands-on, brick and mortar someday. That's my goal. I'm working with the John Pierce law firm at this time, and John Pierce has a fundraising platform. I think it's called the NCLU, patterned after the ACLU, but it's the National Constitutional Law Union, nclu.com, if you want to contribute to some of these cases and donate to some of these legal defenses.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Roger. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Great show.
Thanks for tuning into the Liam McCollum Show, a podcast by Human Reaction. Check out the Human Reaction Weekly podcast hosted by Joe Sheehan, David Rand, and Kyle Mack. And make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to both of our channels.